Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
Initiation. Highly regarded beat poet Allen Ginsberg, who was an admirer of Srila Prabhupada, invited the devotees to attend a peace demonstration where 30,000 people would be marching up Fifth Avenue from Washington Square Park. Because Mr. Ginsberg assured the devotees that he would be leading the marchers with the Hare Krishna chant, Prabhupada gave his approval for his followers to take part. Although some of the marchers shouted, "Peace in Vietnam," rather than "Hare Krishna," most joined in the chanting. Ginsberg led with a small portable harmonium, while Hayagriva, one of the earliest devotees and a close personal friend of Ginsberg's, played on a trumpet and walked alongside him. With their long hair and beards, they looked almost like twin brothers. Chanting along joyously with the large group, I thought about how I would have viewed this event just 3 weeks earlier. I would have been enormously impressed by these famous leaders of the peace movement, my heroes, believing that such a march could really bring an end to the war. On that Saturday, however, my mindset was shifted. My belief now was that only the chanting could end wars. The chanting invokes the presence of the soul of all souls, who is non-different from his holy name, and whose remembrance purifies the atmosphere from both the cause and the effect of the war. I was happy just to be there, singing the holy names, happy to hear everyone else joining in, and gratified that after the demonstration, some of the marchers would be coming to the temple for more chanting and for prasadam, that delicious sacred food. The next day, everyone from the temple accompanied Prabhupada to the large hall of a repertory theatre on 10th Street, about 10 blocks from the temple where he led kirtan and gave a lecture. Now, feeling more comfortable with our leader from another world, I went on stage with his devotees and relished his nodding and smiling at me. He'd recognized me. Although I enjoyed the lecture, when it was over, only one sentence stayed with me. You are meant to be with God at every moment. As the audience departed, some of the devotees remained in front of the theatre, milling around. Bob Corrins, one of the few devotees who was married and had a job, asked me if I had begun to think about initiation. I wasn't exactly sure what that entailed. I only understood it as the ceremony wherein the guru and disciple formally accept their responsibilities to each other. I knew there were rules and regulations too, which was a little off-putting. I have some doubts, I replied. I like the philosophy, but I don't know about surrendering my life. Bob was ready and talked with me for a few moments about the benefits of taking vows. After he left, I stood there for a while, contemplating my doubts. Swamiji teaches that we are not these bodies. It sounds great, but what if I am this body and not an eternal soul? What then would be the use of vows? I will have wasted this one life, which may be my only life, on a false premise. Just then, Srila Prabhupada sent one of the devotees to ask me if I wanted to ride back to the temple with him and a few others in the van. Delightfully surprised, I walked quickly to the van and hopped in. Although Prabhupada didn't speak during the short ride, I was overwhelmed with a sense of honor. Just sitting near him seemed the best of blessings. When we arrived at the temple, he went directly to his apartment just behind the storefront, while the rest of us entered the temple room. Dirty pots and pans greeted us with their uncomfortable presence, a remnant from a blissful lunch earlier in the day. Usually they're taken to the kitchen in the Swami's apartment right after lunch prasadam, Rai Ram said. Whoever usually does it must have forgotten in the excitement of the program. Happy for the opportunity to do some service, I offered to take them upstairs. Achyutananda, who was one of the brahmacharis, or unmarried celibate student monks, living in the temple, was already in the kitchen when I arrived. Busy cooking, he looked up when he saw me with the pots and said bluntly, "You're not supposed to be here unless you're initiated." I was flustered. I saw Srila Prabhupada in his greeting room out of the corner of my eye, and my consciousness regarding initiation instantly changed by the purity of his presence. I lied. "Well, that's why I came up here. I want to ask if I can be initiated. That's why I'm here." Looking up from his desk and appearing unsurprised by my request, he asked, "Do you know the 4 rules?" I stammered. "No intoxication, no meat, fish or eggs, no gambling, and no illicit sex." "Can you follow the rules?" I had so far only given up cigarettes and drugs. I said, yes. "All right," he replied. "You can be initiated in 2 weeks. With Bob." Hardly believing what had just transpired, I felt elated, which surprised me, since I had been unsure whether or not I was ready. I would have expected to feel trepidation of some sort. Instead, I practically floated down the stairs. The small courtyard between the apartment and the temple, which I had passed through on my way in, suddenly looked brilliant and beautiful, even though its trees and shrubs were flowerless. It was beautiful because it was Prabhupada's courtyard. The entire atmosphere took on new meaning. Prabhupada had agreed to accept me as his spiritual daughter, and he would be my eternal spiritual master. That evening, I told my family. They knew I was visiting the temple, but they considered initiation an extreme step. Seeing my new life in relation to their family circle, their only frame of reference, they could only think I was abandoning them. My indiscriminate inexperience in conveying the philosophy and lack of compassion didn't help the situation. They felt crushed by my flurry of abrupt statements like, "We're not these bodies," and "You are not my real family. All of God's creation, all living beings are my family." My brother David, 1 year younger than I, was worried that I might have gone crazy. Our sisters, Carol and Joanne, a few years younger, looked shocked, and my mother and father felt rejected. "This movement you aligned with is too controlled, too communal," David said. Aggrieved. "Maybe you've lost your ability to make individual choices. You're just going to Krishna because it's the farthest thing from our strained family situation." "Yeah, we kids fight, and BT and Harry fight more. Yeah, sometimes Harry gets violent, but still they're our parents. We're family. I think you're just trying to escape." I felt sorry for them, but I continued to visit the temple almost every day. Although my faith wavered daily, with thoughts ranging from, "This is too good to be true," to, "But what if there's no Krishna?" There seemed to be a mystical thread that always pulled me back to my new spiritual father. Near the end of October, on the day before my initiation, following the devotee's instructions, I bought small red beads at a craft store and then sat in a corner of the temple room, threading and knotting each bead on a string. Hayagriva came over to watch me. He said in his slightly nasal voice and slightly southern accent, "Swamiji says the 108 beads represent the 108 main gopis." I looked up at him quizzingly, wondering who the gopis were and what they had to do with chanting. "They are the transcendental milkmaids who are the greatest devotees of Krishna," he added. "The beads also represent the 108 scriptures called the Upanishads. So, if you chant one good round, 108 beads, you surpass the knowledge of the Upanishads. Swamiji says that initiated devotees chant a minimum of 16 rounds. That's 16 times 108 beads a day. It takes 1.5 to 2 hours. Is there something special about 16? I asked, pushing the string through another bead. He first told us to chant 64 rounds a day. That's the traditional standard in our disciplic succession. We tried it, but it seemed impossible. Then he reduced it to 32, but we still said it was impossible. So he agreed we could do 16 a day. Rock bottom. He says that a pure devotee is in so much ecstasy by chanting that he can't stop even for a moment. What happens during the initiation ceremony? What's its meaning? Hayagriva explained, initiations have been taking place for thousands of years, millions of years. They're Vedic. The word meant very little to me. Vedic just means we learn about everything from the Vedic scriptures and the culture of ancient Vedic India. Again, seeing my blank expression, he said, "You've not heard of the Vedas? Those are the scriptures Swamiji reads from each day." "Veda means knowledge," Brahmanda interjected. "All the original and authentic knowledge is in the Vedic scriptures." "Swamiji says Vedic knowledge is perfect," Achyutananda added, "because it's spoken by liberated souls in a chain of teachers going back to Krishna himself. The initiation ceremony connects you with the disciplic chain through the present guru. As far as what happens at an initiation ceremony, I'll let you see that for yourself. Swamiji already held 3 ceremonies and initiated 17 devotees. You and Bob will be number 18 and 19. "I can say something about it," Bob offered. "It means you agree to 3 things: to accept Guru as God's representative, to serve him with your heart for the rest of this life, and to serve him eternally thereafter." In the evening, Srila Prabhupada spoke to my heart during his lecture. Some of you do not know what is the meaning of this Hare Krishna. It is just addressing the Supreme Lord and his energy, Hara. Hara is the energy and Krishna is the Supreme Lord. So we are addressing Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. O energy of the Lord, O Lord, please accept me. That's all. Please accept me. We have no other prayer. Please accept me. Lord Chaitanya taught that we should simply cry and pray for him to accept us. That's all. As his lecture continued, I learned that Lord Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is that same Supreme Controller, our soul's intimate friend, Krishna. Instead of appearing as Krishna, he appeared in the form of a devotee. He did this to teach by his own example how to love Krishna. Prabhupada continued, so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu addresses him, "Oh, my dear Krishna, son of Nanda, somehow or other I have now fallen in this ocean of nescience, ignorance. Please pick me up and fix me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. That's all." Just like a man fallen in the ocean, if somebody goes and picks him up, bringing him just 1 inch above the water, he feels immediately relieved. Immediately. So, as soon as we are fixed up in Krishna consciousness, there is immediate relief. There is no question about it. It is such a nice thing. Whereas I'd been tossed and turned by my intermittent doubts in accepting the supremacy and even existence of Krishna, now I was being invited to beg Krishna to accept me. Prabhupada was revolutionizing my thoughts, turning them upside down and inside out, allowing me a new paradigm. The day came for initiation. Since the only initiated girl had left New York for San Francisco before I met the devotees, I had no idea how to dress for the event. I wore what I considered my most spiritual garb, black jeans and a black long-sleeve turtleneck jersey. The ceremony took place in Prabhupada's apartment, the same room in which I had originally met him a month earlier. The front room was full of gladiolas and roses in large vases. That heavenly frankincense aroma permeated the air, and cinder blocks enclosed a small sandpit. My new and eternal spiritual master sat comfortably on a thin mat before the 30 devotees and guests, and after reciting some Sanskrit verses, began his lecture. Right from the onset, he explained the Vedas. He said that they were not compiled by defective human beings, nor did they consist of faulty experimental knowledge. Krishna himself spoke the Vedas to his liberated disciple Brahma, the first created being, who spoke it to his disciple, and so on. Because a spiritual master is in the disciplic succession coming directly from Krishna, he has properly heard the Vedic message from the right source and, with realization, can give his perfect knowledge to others. Our Holy Master outlined the 4 defects by which we conditioned souls are beleaguered, defects that liberated souls don't have. We are illusioned, accepting unreal things as real. We have a tendency to cheat others. Our senses are imperfect, and we make mistakes. Only when these defects are removed by pure devotion to Krishna, we will have perfect knowledge. I felt as though I was being born again. For me, the best part of the lecture came when Prabhupada brought the Vedas into my own life in a most intimate way. He explained that the first birth is from a material mother and father, and the second is from the spiritual mother or father. The spiritual father is the spiritual master, and the spiritual mother is the Vedic literature, Veda Mata. Just as a mother tells a child about the father, the Vedic texts tell us about Lord Krishna, the Supreme Father, and about the spiritual master, who is his representative. Hearing this analogy, I remembered my relationship with my material father. Plagued by his own past, his own childhood perhaps, he had regularly taken his anger and frustrations out on the rest of the family. I remembered that on the morning before I'd met Prabhupada at Tompkins Square Park, my father and I had a heated argument. I had stormed out of the house, thinking, he's not really my father. Now I could see how my real father had been calling me on that day. Prabhupada further explained that when a disciple fully surrenders to a spiritual master, that spiritual master takes away the sinful reactions of millions of his past lives. blessing the disciple with transcendental knowledge of his relationship with Krishna. I prayed for the day when that full surrender would come to me. He told his young audience that godly life can be adopted by following 4 principles of religion: austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. These 4 are conversely destroyed by the principles of irreligion, namely falsehood, prostitution, intoxication, and pride. Practically speaking, he said irreligion resides in places of gambling, prostitution, intoxication, and animal slaughter. Gambling, pride, and lying destroy truthfulness. Illicit sex destroys cleanliness. Intoxication destroys austerity, and animal slaughter destroys mercy. He said that if people indulge in these 4 activities, they cannot become good. If people are not good, how can they expect peace and prosperity in the world? By abstaining from these 4 activities, one's mind and body become cleansed, one's senses become controlled, and one comes to the platform of a civilized human being. At that time, one is ready to cultivate an understanding of spiritual subject matters. He explained that if the result of Krishna consciousness does not take place even after continuous hearing and chanting, it must be due to offenses to the holy name. Criticizing Krishna's pure devotees, thinking the bona fide spiritual master an ordinary mortal, considering the glories of the holy name imaginary, and so on. If the devotee is not careful to avoid the 10 kinds of offenses listed in the scriptures, then feelings of ecstatic love for Krishna, bodily hairs standing on end, tears flowing from the eyes, rapturous trembling, will not develop. Would I ever become like that? I wondered for a moment. After the lecture, someone sitting behind me wrapped a long strand of tiny beads 3 times around my neck. When he or she finally tied the strand with a knot, I felt lighter and happier than I had ever felt before. As the initiation ceremony progressed, Srila Prabhupada chanted on Bob's beads, and Bob bowed down and recited a mantra. Prabhupada handed him his beads and said, "You are Rupanugadas." I watched carefully so that I would know what to do when it was my turn. Prabhupada then turned to me and said softly and sweetly, "Now bow down." I bowed down, but I didn't know the mantra. Although I had many times been offering obeisances along with the other devotees, I never thought to ask what they were uttering. Prabhupada understood my dilemma and said, "Namaha, Namaha." I repeated, Om, Om. Word by word, I followed my Guru's recitation of his own pranam mantra, the prayer offering obeisance. Namaha Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Om Vishnu Pad Sri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. Lifting myself up from the bowing position and still kneeling, I glanced towards my new initiating spiritual guru. His eyes looked full of love, and I again felt as if I were seeing deep into my innermost being. As he handed me my beads, he said, "Your name is now Jadurani." Jadurani was the original queen of the Jadu dynasty, in which Krishna himself appeared 5,000 years ago. Of course, Krishna does not take birth. He is like the sun, always present. The sun only appears to rise or be born in the morning and to disappear or die in the evening. Similarly, Krishna never takes birth. He is eternal. But in order to glorify a particular highly devoted family, he appears in that family. Jadurani was the wife of King Jadu, the head of that dynasty, and you are her servant. I felt so honored to receive a sacred name. I watched as Prabhupada sprinkled powdered dyes on the sand in the sandpit. He added some sticks on top of the sand and lit a fire, feeding the fire with small pieces of wood that he first dipped in melted, clarified butter called ghee. He simultaneously chanted ancient mantras. Swaha, he chanted, stretching out the syllables. We all repeated the word, as instructed, and then threw handfuls of sesame and barley seeds, soaked in ghee, into the fire. I had no idea why I was doing any of this, but I had faith that these were the methods of the ancient sages and that I would gradually understand all underlying meanings. Behind me, someone whispered in my ear, "Swaha means we are offering ourselves to Krishna." I could understand this as a symbolic gesture, but why we threw the seeds into the fire was beyond me. Even more mystifying was why Bob and I each threw a banana in the fire after all the mantras were chanted. At the same time, I was captivated by the exotic flavor of the ceremony and the ambience of a primeval rite that had deep spiritual value. I wanted those moments to last forever. "Chant," Prabhupada called out at the end of the ceremony, majestically raising his arms in the air. We all stood and began a loud and joyous kirtan, call and response chanting. During the kirtan, one of the devotees came around to each of us and dotted our foreheads with black ashes from the fire, as was the custom. After the kirtan, we all offered obeisances, reverentially bowing down on the ground, reaffirming our commitment to the Lord and his pure representative. Prabhupada remained standing, his head slightly bent downwards. He respectfully recited prayers to the predecessors, spiritual masters, great devotees, and incarnations of Krishna, just as he always did when we bowed down after each daily kirtan. A few of us followed him into his greeting room, where he sat behind the small metal trunk he had brought with him from India and which now served as his desk. He leaned back casually and said to me, "So, Jadurani was Krishna's great-great-great-great-grandmother." Trying to be funny, I frivolously crinkled up my face and imitated the high-pitched crackling voice of a very old lady, what I assumed a great-great-grandmother would sound like, and said, "Oh, really?" He looked at me gravely for a second, but didn't say anything, and then acted as though nothing had happened. I felt totally foolish. Out of kindness, he handed me one of his 3-volume sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, which he had published in India just before coming to America. He smiled slightly and said, Srimad means beautiful, Bhagavatam means devotee, and also Krishna. So Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story of Krishna and his devotees. Wow, these were the revered Vedic texts he was handing me. I felt blessed. Yet, I still wasn't 100% sure about my future as an initiated disciple. If I change my mind, I asked, can I give the books back? Once again, he didn't look at all surprised. He simply said, yes. I hadn't the faintest idea of how spiritually powerful he was, and that his nonchalant yes was in fact weighty. It was as if he wanted to simultaneously conceal and announce that he already knew my future. That evening, I went to one final party with my old crowd of friends. I shunned all their offers of drinks and drugs, and instead sat in a corner restringing my japa beads. One of my new godbrothers had told me earlier that day, just after the initiation, "Oh, you didn't know? You're supposed to tie a knot between each bead." My beads simply hung together like a necklace. The knot signified the separation between the material and spiritual energies. So that evening, my friends must have thought I had gone mad as I knotted my string in between each bead. Now that I was initiated, Srila Prabhupada became my Guru Maharaj, meaning my initiating spiritual master. He would many times refer to himself as such in relation to us, and this was how he referred to his own spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. When he would speak about the initiating spiritual master of his spiritual master, that is, Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, he would sometimes say, "My Guru Maharaj's Guru Maharaj." He would quote Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who also spoke about his spiritual master, Sri Ishwar Puri, in this way. He would even quote Sri Krishna himself, who did the same. Krishna did not need to accept another person as guru, but to set an example for the world's people, he did so, and referred to his guru as his Guru Maharaj. The next morning, I went to Prabhupada's, our Guru Maharaj's, apartment to get the flower vases from the altar room. The building's Polish landlord, Mr. Chuti, a big, heavy-set man with sloping shoulders, was standing next to him. Prabhupada, on friendly terms with Mr. Chuti, joked as if reciting a rhyming poem, "Mr. Chuti, this is Judy." Then, turning to me with a warm smile, he added, "Your name was Judy. Now it is Jadu." I laughed, and then, oblivious to whether this was a proper time for discussion, asked a question that had been weighing on my mind. "Why is there evil, Swamiji?" "Because you wanted it. Krishna created it," he replied. So simply stated, I thought, appreciating the implications. Evil exists because of our own desires, by our longing for short-lived pleasures at any cost, at the cost of others, and at the cost of our own ultimate well-being. We have become aspiring competitors of Krishna, so to speak. He is the supreme enjoyer. Because we try to turn that truth on its head, evil emerges in the world and in our hearts. I was, as usual, amazed by how Prabhupada had so concisely explained a complicated issue that theologians and scholars have spent their lives trying to figure out. The temple room was crowded that evening, with about 70 dancing and chanting devotees and guests. I peered through the back window as Prabhupada glided like a graceful swan into the courtyard, followed by Brahmananda, who carried his glasses and scriptures. As they entered the temple room, the kirtan reached a crescendo, and we all offered our obeisances. Srila Prabhupada had named his temple on the 2nd Avenue the Radha Krishna Temple, meaning the temple of the reservoir of all potencies, the all-powerful Sri Krishna, and Krishna's complete intrinsic potency, his eternal consort, Sri Radha. He now touched his head and hands on his dais seat as a gesture of reverence to the round painting of Radha and Krishna on the wall above it. Then, lifting his head, he folded his palms and, gazing at the divine couple, stepped onto the dais, the seat of honor. He then picked up the kartal, or small hand cymbals, from the lectern and began another kirtan. I could scarcely believe I was coming in contact with this incredible philosophy. God is both male and female. Wanting to sit near the divine couple's pure representative, I went over to play the 2-foot wide metal gong hanging from the left side of the dais. As I struck the gong with a small wooden stick, I observed Prabhupada moving his head slightly from side to side, his eyes sometimes open and sometimes closed. On the one hand, I was desiring to experience whatever it was that he was experiencing. But on the other hand, my mind was doing its usual gymnastics. I found my attention wandering from the chanting to my old friends and family. Then I remembered his class of a few days earlier, that one who has eaten meat and fish has to become meat and fish on someone else's plate in his next life. As the Bible famously said, "As you sow, so shall you reap." Instantly scared, knowing I had eaten thousands of plates of meat and fish and wanting to destroy the reactions for doing so, I tried harder to bring my attention back to the remedy. I understood that fear is not the most advanced motivation for spiritual life, but it can definitely serve a good starting point. After the kirtan, Guru Maharaj opened his large Sanskrit scripture and put on his eyeglasses. I studied his facial expressions as he scrutinized the words, looking at them and perhaps seeing them as people with whom he was engaged in conversation. I noted his gentle hand movements, turning the pages as if touching someone he loved. Now we will begin the 9th chapter. He told his audience, "We have finished the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. The personality of Godhead, Krishna, is speaking. Shri Bhagavan. I have several times described what this word Bhagavan means. Bhag means opulence, and Van means who possesses. In the Vedic scriptures, we'll find the definition of God. We have got some conception of God, but in the Vedic literature, you'll find definite description." I smiled broadly, thinking, my new mother, the Vedic literatures. "What we mean by God," he continued, "is described in one word, Shri Bhagavan." I mentally repeated the words, Bhagavan, one who has all opulences. I wondered, what constituted an opulence? Jewels? "What are opulences?" Guru Maharaj asked hypothetically. "The opulences are wealth, strength, influence, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. I was in awe. These opulences weren't just some vague idea, but real tangible traits that could be named, identified, and described. The impersonalist philosophies I had been following only said what God was not. Although they professed that God was everything, they said that he had no color, no brain, and no ability to walk, among other negative characteristics. Although they claimed that he was beauty, they also said that he had no face to even sweetly smile. I remembered the emptiness I'd felt. Just because he does not have material qualities, Srila Prabhupada advised us, does not mean that he has no spiritual qualities. These 6 opulences, when you find presented in a personality in full, he is God. You have many rich men here in your New York City, but nobody can claim that he is the richest of all, that he has got the riches of the world. If you find somebody who claims all the riches of the world or the universe belong to me, he is God. He is God. Just like Krishna claimed, I am the enjoyer of all kinds of activities. He is the friend of all living entities. When a person understands that God is the proprietor of everything, God is the friend of everyone, God is the enjoyer of everything, one becomes very peaceful. During the class, my mind drifted again, back to my family. As children, my brother and sisters and I often fought on ownership issues, either physically or with spiteful words. How absurd. We were no different from most other families in our neighborhood, and on a larger scale, so were our world leaders. Nothing belongs to us. I was now learning, not even our own minds. Everything belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, God is proprietor, Prabhupada continued. Therefore, he is the richest man. He is not man, of course. He is God. But he is the richest. There are many incarnations of God. Nowadays, you'll find especially in India. But if you ask them, are you the proprietor of everything? Oh, that is very difficult to answer. The temple president, Brahmananda, had been standing at the back of the temple by the front door for the duration of the evening program, greeting people and saying goodbye. When the class ended, he whispered to a few of us, "It's pretty disheartening. The temple was packed to capacity for the kirtans, but during the lecture, people walked out one by one or two by two. Look, now at the end of the lecture, it's just us regulars, plus a few others. How long can this go on? It seems like a losing proposition." I looked around at the half-empty room and nodded. The chanting is like entertainment, but the class means a change of life and renunciation, Brahmananda said. He shrugged his shoulders with a forlorn expression. He sat down in front of the dais, facing the audience. It was his duty as temple president to welcome the guests and make announcements about future engagements. Meanwhile, our worshipful spiritual master looked serene and undisturbed by the guests who had left. He had someone pass around a basket to take up a collection of donations, while another devotee brought around slices of fruit prasadam for everyone. He knew that things would change in due course. Not only would millions of people in our generation and future generations become transformed by his words, but billions and billions of living entities in all species would benefit by them as well. Prabhupada had so captivated me that I wanted to introduce him to those who had previously influenced my life in some way. I asked if I could bring my ex-guitar teacher, revered Gary Davis, to meet him. He's a famous blues singer, Swamiji, I explained, and he has thousands of followers. Why not? Prabhupada agreed, nodding his head slightly to one side as Indians do when they want to say yes. About the same age as our spiritual preceptor, Gary Davis was a gospel blues singer whose gruff, salt-of-the-earth vocals and intricate guitar finger-picking techniques made him a hero among the famous folk and rock musicians and even a mentor among American youth. I wanted him to receive mercy from a genuine pure devotee. Since meeting Prabhupada, I realized that blues artists could not help their audiences give up a self-destructive life, nor could they teach anything of substance about the supreme truth. As soon as I brought Gary Davis into the greeting room, Prabhupada invited him to sit close by. After some friendly introductions, Prabhupada asked him why he wore a priest's collar. He replied in his deep voice and southern drawl, "Well, it shows my dedication to God. It shows I'm an ordained Baptist minister." Prabhupada pulled out his own neck beads from under his saffron turtleneck and with his thumb held them out as far as they would go. "We also have a collar," he said proudly. "A dog collar. When a dog has a collar, it means he has a master. And that means the dog catcher will not take him to the pound. This, our dog collar, means that God, Krishna, is our master. Because we have got a master, the god of death, Yamaraj, will not come to take us." When Reverend Davis commented, "It's hard to know what kind of prayer to sing to God," Prabhupada replied, "We simply pray to be able to love him. That will please him." After some time, when the discussion was over, I brought Reverend Davis downstairs and thanked him for coming. Returning to Prabhupada's room, I thought he might comment on the conversation. Instead, he spoke to me about Krishna's 64 qualities. He is intelligent. He possesses a good memory and fine discretion. He is forgiving, compassionate, grave, and self-satisfied. He controls the universe. He is gentle, shy, and equipoised, and he is heroic. At first, the change in topic confused me. Then, I once again understood that my spiritual master's only desire for me and for all the souls of the world was to know the real eternal hero, Krishna. I listened as he explained that Lord Vishnu, the origin of all the worlds, has 94% of Krishna's qualities. Lord Shiva, the chief of all demigods, has 86%, and Lord Brahma, the creator of this one universe, has 78%. When a person becomes perfect through Krishna consciousness, he said, he also manifests 78% of the qualities of Krishna in minute quantity. Enthused, I asked, "So that means you have 78% of Krishna's qualities, Swamiji?" His eyes opened wide. "Me? I'm just a conditioned soul." My God, I gasped in thought. How humble he is.
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare